The radio crackled with desperation. "We're pinned down. Request immediate extraction." The voice belonged to Captain Rodriguez, leader of Delta Squad, but the static couldn't hide the strain. Somewhere in the mountains of Eastern Europe, 12 of the military's finest operators were trapped in a kill zone, surrounded by hostiles who had been waiting for them. The ambush was perfect, the escape routes sealed, and time was running out. But high above on a ridge that most people would consider impossible to reach, someone was already moving. Someone who had been watching. Someone who never missed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountain air carried a bite that cut through even the heaviest gear, and Senior Sergeant Elena Vasquez felt it against the exposed skin around her eyes as she adjusted the scope one final time. The wind meter on her wrist read 8 miles per hour, gusting to 12, coming from the northwest. At this elevation, nearly 9,000 feet above sea level, every variable mattered. Every calculation had to be perfect. She had been lying in this position for 6 hours, motionless except for the slow, deliberate movements required to track the sun's path and adjust for the changing light. Her ghillie suit blended seamlessly with the rocky outcropping and scattered pine needles that covered the ridge. From below she was invisible. From satellite imagery, she was nothing more than another shadow on the mountainside. The Barrett MAB N80 2A1 rested on its bipod, the massive 50 caliber rifle extending 5 feet in front of her. She had carried it up here piece by piece over 3 days, along with her spotter scope, range finder, weather instruments, and enough ammunition to make a difference. The climb had been brutal, but Elena had done worse things in worse places for worse reasons. Her radio earpiece whispered with encrypted chatter from the operations center, 200 miles away. Multiple frequencies layered over each other in a carefully orchestrated symphony of military coordination. Transport helicopters were 30 minutes out, but 30 minutes might as well have been 30 hours for the men trapped in the valley below. Elena shifted her weight slightly, feeling the familiar pressure points where her body met the rocky ground. Her shooting mat provided minimal cushioning, but comfort had never been the priority. Precision was everything. She had learned that lesson 15 years ago, as a young Marine, fresh out of Scout Sniper School, when her first shot in combat had sailed 6 inches wide of its intended target. The margin of error had cost her team leader his life. She never missed anymore. Through her scope the valley spread out like a tactical map come to life. The abandoned mining facility dominated the center, its corrugated metal buildings arranged in a rough semicircle around what had once been the main processing plant. Rust streaked the walls, and several sections of roofing had collapsed under the weight of accumulated snow and neglect. It should have been empty, forgotten, just another relic of industrial ambition that had died when the ore ran out. Instead it had become a fortress. Elena counted 17 distinct positions where muzzle flashes had originated during the initial contact 20 minutes ago. The insurgents had chosen their ground well, using the buildings and mining equipment to create overlapping fields of fire that covered every approach to the facility. They had heavy machine guns mounted in the upper windows, rifle teams positioned behind concrete barriers, and at least 2 sniper teams of their own working from elevated positions. Delta Squad had walked into a trap that had been months in the making. The intelligence briefing 3 days ago had been straightforward enough. A high-value target had been traced to this location, a bomb maker responsible for attacks across 3 countries. The facility was supposed to be lightly defended, maybe 6 to 8 fighters at most. The plan called for a quick helicopter insertion, a rapid assault to capture or eliminate the target, and immediate extraction. Elena had been positioned as Overwatch, a security measure that command had added almost as an afterthought. Her job was supposed to be simple: provide early warning of any approaching reinforcements and offer long-range fire support if needed. She was insurance against the unexpected. The unexpected had arrived in force. Delta Squad's helicopter had taken heavy fire during the approach, forcing an emergency landing nearly a kilometer from the target building. The pilot had managed to set down without crashing, but the aircraft was damaged beyond immediate repair. The squad had fought their way to within 200 meters of the facility, before the full scope of the opposition became clear. They were outnumbered, outgunned and completely surrounded. Elena watched through her scope as another burst of automatic weapons fire kicked up dust around the rocky outcropping, where Staff Sergeant Chen had taken cover. Chen was Delta Squad's medic, and Elena could see that he was working on someone. Probably Corporal Williams, who had taken shrapnel from a rocket-propelled grenade during the approach. The range to Chen's position was 1,847 meters according to her laser rangefinder. The angle was steep, nearly 30 degrees downward, which would affect the bullet's trajectory. The wind was steady now, coming almost directly across her line of sight. Elena ran the calculations automatically, her mind processing variables that lesser shooters would need computers to manage. Temperature -12 degrees Celsius, barometric pressure 8 inches of mercury, humidity 37%, altitude 9,200 feet above sea level. She made minute adjustments to her scope's elevation and windage knobs, movements so small they would be invisible to an observer, but critical for accuracy at this range. The Barrett's massive barrel was cold now, having been exposed to the mountain air for hours, but Elena had accounted for that as well. Her spotter scope mounted on a separate tripod to her left gave her a wider view of the battlefield. She could see the insurgents moving between positions, coordinating their fire, tightening the noose around the trapped Americans. They were professionals, not the ragtag militia fighters that intelligence had suggested. Someone had planned this operation very carefully. Elena's earpiece crackled with an update from the operations center. Overwatch 7, this is base. Be advised, extraction birds are encountering heavy weather. Estimated delay 45 minutes. She keyed her microphone once in acknowledgement, but said nothing. Radio silence was critical to her position. Even encrypted transmissions could be detected by sophisticated enemy equipment, and revealing her location would end her effectiveness immediately. Below, Delta Squad was running low on ammunition. Elena could tell by the decreasing rate of return fire and the longer pauses between shots. Captain Rodriguez was conserving what they had left, but conservation would only delay the inevitable. Elena had been in Rodriguez's position before, trapped and outnumbered with no immediate prospect of rescue. It had been in Afghanistan, during an operation that had gone wrong in every possible way. Her squad had been pinned down in a compound for 18 hours while enemy reinforcements poured into the area. They had survived only because a drone strike had eliminated the machine gun nest that had been keeping them trapped. But there were no drones available today, no close air support, no artillery within range. There was only Elena, her rifle, and the skills that had been forged through years of the most demanding training the military could provide. She had graduated first in her class from the Army's Special Operations Interdiction course, a program so selective that only 12 soldiers completed it each year. She had spent 3 years assigned to a classified unit that didn't officially exist, conducting operations in countries that the government would never acknowledge. She had made shots that defied belief, eliminated targets that other snipers had declared impossible. But this would be different. This would be at the absolute limit of what was possible with current technology and human skill. Elena began her breathing routine, the meditation-like process that would calm her nervous system and steady her heartbeat. She had learned the technique from a Tibetan monk during a training exercise that had taken her team into the Himalayas. The monk had explained that the mind must become like still water, reflecting truth without distortion. Her heart rate dropped from 60 beats per minute to 45. Her breathing became so slow and controlled that the condensation from her exhalations barely fogged the air in front of her face. The ambient sounds of the mountain, wind through the trees, the distant crack of gunfire, the mechanical noise of helicopters still far away, faded into background noise. Through her scope, the world narrowed to a circle of magnified reality. She could see individual insurgents moving between positions, could read the markings on their weapons, could even distinguish the different camouflage patterns of their clothing. They moved with confidence, secure in their superior numbers and defensive positions. That confidence would be their weakness. Elena selected her first target with the cold calculation of a chess master planning several moves ahead. A heavy machine gunner positioned in the second-floor window of the main processing building. He commanded the best view of Delta Squad's position, and had been responsible for most of the effective fire that was keeping the Americans pinned down. The range was 1,923 meters. The angle was 42 degrees. The wind had shifted slightly, now coming from the north-northwest at 10 miles per hour, with gusts to 15. Elena adjusted her scope and settled into her final shooting position.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Her left hand gripped the rifle's forend with just enough pressure to provide stability without introducing tremor. Her right hand found the familiar contours of the pistol grip, finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. The Barrett M82A1 fired a .50 BMG cartridge that weighed 750 grains and left the muzzle at nearly 3,000 feet per second. At this range, the bullet would take nearly 3 seconds to reach its target, dropping almost 60 feet due to gravity and drifting several feet due to wind. But Elena had made similar shots before, and the rifle was capable of accuracy that bordered on the supernatural. She controlled her breathing, waiting for the natural pause between exhalation and inhalation when her body would be completely still. The crosshairs of her scope settled on the machine gunner's center mass, tracking the slight movements as he adjusted his position behind the weapon. Elena's world contracted to a single point of light, a moment of perfect clarity where time seemed suspended. Her finger moved to the trigger, taking up the slack with pressure so gradual it was barely perceptible. In the valley below, Delta Squad continued their desperate fight, unaware that salvation was taking aim from a position they couldn't even see. Captain Rodriguez checked his ammunition for the third time in 5 minutes and tried to calculate how long they could hold out. Staff Sergeant Chen worked frantically to stabilize Corporal Williams, whose condition was deteriorating rapidly. The insurgents prepared for their final assault, confident that the trapped Americans would soon run out of options. But high above them all, Elena Vasquez had become something more than human. She was mathematics made flesh, physics given form, the perfect fusion of technology and training that represented the absolute pinnacle of precision marksmanship. The crosshairs steadied. The world held its breath. And in that moment of perfect stillness, Elena began the sequence that would change everything. Her training had taught her that successful long-range shooting was 90% preparation and 10% execution. The preparation phase was complete. She had studied the terrain for days, memorized every possible shooting position, calculated ranges to dozens of potential targets. She had accounted for weather, altitude, temperature, and wind. She had positioned herself at the optimal location to provide coverage for multiple scenarios. Now came the execution. Elena's finger completed its journey to the trigger, feeling the familiar resistance that told her exactly how much pressure remained before the rifle would fire. Her breathing cycle reached the natural pause and her heartbeat seemed to slow until each pulse was separated by an eternity of silence. The machine gunner in her scope shifted slightly, turning to communicate with someone outside Elena's field of view. It was a minor movement, but it changed the angle of his body armor and presented a slightly larger target profile. Elena noted the change and made a micro-adjustment to her point of aim, moving the crosshairs 2 inches to the left to compensate for the target's new position. The movement was so small that anyone watching through her scope would have missed it entirely, but at a range of nearly 2,000 meters, those 2 inches would make the difference between a hit and a miss. The wind gauge on her wrist indicated a slight decrease in velocity, dropping from 10 miles per hour to 8. Elena compensated by adjusting her point of aim 1 additional inch into the wind, trusting in calculations that had been drilled into her through thousands of practice rounds. In her earpiece she could hear Captain Rodriguez coordinating his team's defensive positions. His voice remained calm and professional despite the desperate circumstances, but Elena could detect the underlying strain. Delta Squad was down to their last few magazines and everyone knew it. "Charlie team, consolidate on my position," Rodriguez ordered. "Bravo team, cover the eastern approach. We need to make every round count." Elena had served with Rodriguez before, during a classified operation in Central Asia. She respected his leadership and tactical judgment, but she also knew that leadership and judgment wouldn't be enough to get his people out of this situation. What they needed was a miracle. What they were going to get was precision. The Barrett M82A1 had been Elena's companion for 7 years, carried across 3 continents and into more combat zones than she cared to remember. She knew every component of the weapon intimately, understood its capabilities and limitations better than most people understood their own children. The rifle weighed 28 pounds empty, but Elena had long ago stopped noticing the weight. The massive muzzle brake was designed to reduce recoil, but firing the 50 BMG cartridge was still like being punched in the shoulder by a heavyweight boxer. Elena had learned to embrace the recoil, to use it as feedback that told her exactly how the rifle was performing. Her shooting position was as perfect as the terrain would allow. The rocky outcropping provided a solid rest for the rifle's bipod, and Elena had cleared away every loose stone that might shift under the weapon's recoil. Her body was aligned behind the rifle at the optimal angle, distributing the recoil forces in a way that would minimize movement and allow for rapid follow-up shots if necessary. The ghillie suit that covered her entirety was a work of art, constructed over several weeks using materials gathered from this specific environment. Pine needles, dried grass, and carefully selected fabric strips combined to create a camouflage pattern that was virtually perfect for this terrain. Even if the insurgents spotted her muzzle flash, they would have difficulty determining her exact position. Elena had been here for 72 hours, moving only during darkness to adjust her position and maintain her equipment. She had eaten cold rations and drunk water at precisely calculated intervals to maintain her physical condition without compromising her digestive system. She had slept in 3-hour shifts, always maintaining a state of readiness that would allow her to engage targets within seconds of waking. This was what the military called hide-sight discipline, and Elena practiced it with the devotion of a monk maintaining a sacred ritual. Through her spotter scope, Elena observed the insurgents' communications patterns. They were using hand signals between positions, indicating a level of training and operational security that confirmed her suspicion that these were not ordinary militia fighters. Someone had invested considerable time and resources in preparing these people for this specific operation. The trap had been designed not just to eliminate Delta Squad but to send a message. 12 of America's elite soldiers, killed in an operation that should have been routine, would generate headlines and political pressure that would be worth more than any tactical victory. But the people who had planned this trap had made one critical error in their calculations. They had assumed that Delta Squad would be operating alone. Elena checked her rifle's chamber, confirming that a round was loaded and ready. The cartridge was match-grade ammunition, manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The 750-grain bullet was designed specifically for long-range precision work, with a ballistic coefficient that allowed it to maintain velocity and accuracy at distances that would defeat lesser projectiles. She had 47 more cartridges in the magazine and additional magazines positioned within easy reach. If this situation required sustained fire, Elena was prepared to deliver it. But ideally, this situation would be resolved with surgical precision rather than overwhelming firepower. Elena had learned long ago that the most effective military operations were often the most economical ones. Every shot had to count, not just for tactical reasons but because ammunition was finite and resupply was impossible at this location. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks, and the changing light would soon require adjustments to Elena's scope settings. She had calculated the sun's path days in advance and knew exactly when shadows would begin to affect her various shooting lanes. In approximately 90 minutes, her current position would lose its effectiveness, and she would need to relocate to a backup position that she had prepared on the eastern face of the ridge. But 90 minutes was more than enough time to complete this mission. Elena's watch showed 15:47 hours local time. The extraction helicopters were still 43 minutes away, assuming they could navigate the weather front that was moving through the region. The meteorological reports indicated increasing wind and the possibility of snow, conditions that would make helicopter operations extremely hazardous. Delta Squad needed to be freed from their current position well before the weather deteriorated further. Elena returned her attention to the machine gunner in the processing building's second floor. He had resumed his position behind the weapon and was systematically firing controlled bursts at the rocky outcropping where Delta Squad had taken cover. Each burst was precisely aimed, and Elena could see chips of stone flying as the heavy bullets impacted near the American insurgent was good at his job, but he had no idea that he was being observed by someone whose job was to be better. Elena's crosshairs settled on the target's center mass, just below the throat where body armor would provide minimal protection. At this range, the 50 BMG bullet would retain enough energy to penetrate virtually any personal protection equipment that the insurgent might be wearing. Her breathing reached the bottom of its cycle, that moment of perfect stillness between exhalation and inhalation when the human body becomes as stable as mechanically possible. Her heartbeat seemed to pause, creating a window of opportunity measured in fractions of a second. Elena applied the final pressure to the trigger. The Barrett M82A1 erupted with a sound like thunder, the massive muzzle brake directing gases and flame in precisely calculated directions. The rifle's recoil drove backward against Elena's shoulder with tremendous force, but her body absorbed the impact without moving from its optimal shooting position. 50 caliber bullet left the muzzle at 2,910 feet per second, beginning a ballistic trajectory that had been calculated with mathematical precision. For the first several hundred meters, the bullet flew faster than the speed of sound, creating a supersonic crack that would be audible to anyone in its path. As the bullet traveled downrange, it began to lose velocity due to air resistance, and its path curved downward under the influence of gravity. The wind pushed it slightly to the east, but Elena had compensated for this effect in her point of aim. After traveling for 2.9 seconds across nearly 2,000 meters of mountainous terrain, the bullet struck its target with devastating effect. The insurgent machine gunner simply disappeared from Elena's scope, his weapon falling silent instantly. Below in the valley, the sudden cessation of the heavy machine gun fire was immediately noticeable. Captain Rodriguez recognized the significance of the silence and began issuing new orders to his team. "That was long-range precision fire," he announced over the radio. "We have a guardian angel. Prepare to advance on my signal."
Elena was already acquiring her second target before the sound of her first shot had finished echoing through the valley. Through her scope, she could see insurgents in multiple positions reacting to the loss of their heavy weapon, trying to identify the source of the shot that had eliminated their key defensive position. They were looking in the wrong direction. Elena's training had taught her that the most effective snipers were those who could remain undetected even after engaging targets. The key was to control every aspect of the shot: sound, light, movement, and signature. The Barrett's massive muzzle brake reduced the visible flash, and Elena's position had been chosen to minimize the acoustic signature that would reach the valley floor. Her second target was a sniper team positioned in the mining facility's water tower, approximately 200 meters east of the main building. Elena had identified them during her initial reconnaissance by the distinctive shape of their rifle and the way they moved between firing positions. The range was 2,156 meters, slightly longer than her first shot but well within the Barrett's effective range. The angle was steeper, nearly 50 degrees, which would require additional compensation for the bullet's ballistic arc. Elena adjusted her scope's elevation and windage knobs with the precision of a watchmaker, making calculations that accounted for the changing atmospheric conditions and the slight shift in wind direction. The afternoon sun was now at a different angle, creating new shadows and altering the light conditions in her scope. Through her spotter scope, she watched as the insurgent sniper settled into position behind his rifle, apparently preparing to engage one of Delta Squad's exposed positions. The target was approximately 800 meters from the trapped image, close enough to be devastatingly effective with a precision rifle. Elena would not allow that shot to be taken. Her crosshairs found the target, and she began her breathing cycle again, the familiar rhythm of preparation, calculation, and execution that had become as natural as walking. The world narrowed to a single point of focus, and time seemed to slow as Elena entered the meditative state that was the hallmark of elite marksmanship. The insurgent sniper was partially concealed behind a steel support beam, presenting a smaller target than Elena's first shot, but he had made the critical error of establishing a routine, moving in and out of cover in a predictable pattern as he searched for targets below. Elena waited for the pattern to repeat itself, her crosshairs tracking the small section of the water tower where the sniper would reappear. Patience was as important as accuracy in this type of work, and Elena had learned to wait for the perfect shot rather than settling for a merely good one. The target emerged from cover right on schedule, and Elena's crosshairs were waiting for him. Her trigger finger completed its journey, and the Barrett fired its second shot of the engagement. The recoil was identical to the first shot, absorbed by Elena's shooting position without disturbing her sight picture. The second bullet followed a slightly different trajectory due to the increased range and steeper angle, but its terminal effect was identical to the first. The insurgent sniper position fell silent, and Elena was already searching for her third target. In the valley below, Captain Rodriguez had recognized the tactical opportunity that Elena's precision fire was creating. With the heavy machine gun and sniper team eliminated, Delta Squad had regained the initiative for the first time since the engagement began. Alpha Team advanced to the drainage ditch, Rodriguez ordered. Bravo and Charlie teams provide covering fire. We're going to bound forward and establish fire superiority. Elena watched through her spotter scope as the Americans began their tactical movement, using the temporary advantage that her shots had created. But she knew that the window of opportunity would be brief. The remaining insurgents would quickly adjust their positions and attempt to re-establish their defensive perimeter. She needed to continue applying pressure to keep the enemy off balance and prevent them from regaining their earlier advantage. Her third target was a rocket-propelled grenade team positioned behind a concrete barrier near the facility's main entrance. Elena had observed them fire twice during the initial engagement, and their position allowed them to cover the most likely avenue of approach that Delta Squad would need to use. The range was 1,734 meters, shorter than her previous shots but complicated by the angle and the target's partial concealment. The RPG team had learned from the fate of their colleagues and was maintaining better cover discipline, exposing themselves only briefly to acquire targets.
Elena would have to time her shot perfectly, waiting for the moment when one of the insurgents exposed enough of his body to present a viable target. It was a more challenging shot than her first two, requiring not just accuracy but precise timing. Through her scope, Elena watched the RPG team's position for several minutes, learning their movement patterns and identifying the moment when they would be most vulnerable. The team consisted of two insurgents, a gunner who carried the launcher and a loader who handled the ammunition. Elena decided to target the gunner, reasoning that eliminating him would neutralize the team's ability to engage targets effectively. The loader might be able to operate the weapon, but it would take time to reorganize, and time was something the insurgents could not afford to give Delta Squad. The gunner emerged from cover for approximately 3 seconds every 45 seconds, following a pattern that Elena had observed through multiple cycles. During those 3 seconds he would rise to a firing position, acquire a target, and then duck back down behind the concrete barrier. Elena synchronized her breathing cycle with the target's movement pattern, preparing to fire during the when he would be exposed. Her crosshairs were pre-positioned at the point where the gunner's head and shoulders would appear, eliminating the need for last-second adjustments that might compromise accuracy. The pattern repeated exactly as Elena had predicted. The gunner rose into position, and Elena's crosshairs were waiting for him. Her trigger broke cleanly, sending the .50 caliber bullet on its precisely calculated trajectory. At a range of 1,734 meters, the bullet's flight time was slightly shorter than her previous shots, but still long enough for Elena to watch its effect through her scope. The insurgent gunner collapsed behind the barrier, and the RPG team's position fell silent. 3 shots, 3 targets eliminated, and Delta Squad was beginning to advance. Elena's radio crackled with an update from the operations center. Overwatch 7, this is base. Extraction birds are encountering severe weather conditions. Revised ETA is now 65 minutes. Elena keyed her microphone once to acknowledge the transmission, but her mind was already processing the implications. 65 minutes was a long time to maintain the tactical advantage that her precision fire had created. The insurgents would adapt to their losses, reposition their remaining forces, and attempt to regain the initiative. She would need to continue applying pressure to prevent the enemy from reorganizing, and to provide Delta Squad with the opportunity they needed to either reach a more defensible position or eliminate the remaining threats entirely. Through her spotter scope, Elena could see insurgents moving between positions in the mining facility, responding to the loss of their key defensive positions. Their movements were more cautious now, more deliberate. They had realized that they were being observed by a precision marksman, and they were attempting to adapt their tactics accordingly. But adaptation took time, and Elena was not going to give them that time. Her fourth target was a heavy machine gun team that had repositioned to the roof of a smaller building on the facility's eastern perimeter. They were attempting to establish a new field of fire that would allow them to engage Delta Squad's advancing elements. The range was 2,203 meters, and the target was moving. Elena would need to lead the target, calculating not just where it was but where it would be when the bullet arrived nearly 3 seconds later. This was the most challenging type of shot in long-range precision marksmanship, a moving target at extreme range. It required Elena to process multiple variables simultaneously while maintaining the perfect trigger control and breathing discipline that had characterized her previous shots. Elena tracked the machine gun team through her scope, observing their movement speed and direction. They were carrying the heavy weapon between 2 men, moving in a roughly straight line toward their intended position. Their speed was approximately 2 meters per second, which meant they would travel approximately 6 meters during the bullet's flight time. Elena calculated the lead required and positioned her crosshairs 6 meters ahead of the team's current position. The shot would require perfect timing, firing at the exact moment when the targets would intersect with the bullet's trajectory. The machine gun team continued their movement, unaware that their path had been calculated and their fate determined. Elena's breathing reached its lowest point, and her trigger finger began its final pressure. The Barrett fired its 4th shot of the engagement, and Elena immediately began tracking the bullet's path through her scope. At this range she could actually observe the bullet's trajectory, a faint disturbance in the air that marked its passage downrange. The machine gun team was still moving when the bullet arrived, but Elena's calculations had been perfect. 50 caliber projectiles struck the lead insurgent's center mass, and the heavy weapon crashed to the ground as both men fell. 4 shots, 4 targets eliminated, and Delta Squad was now within 150 meters of the mining facility's perimeter. But Elena's work was far from finished.
Through her spotter scope, she could see that the insurgents still outnumbered the advancing Americans by a significant margin. The precision fire had eliminated their most dangerous weapons and given Delta Squad the tactical initiative, but the final phase of the engagement would still require careful management. Elena began scanning for her fifth target, knowing that each subsequent shot would become more challenging as the remaining insurgents adapted to the threat from above. They would use better cover, move more unpredictably, and attempt to identify her position. The sun was lower now, casting longer shadows across the valley and changing the light conditions in Elena's scope. She made minor adjustments to her scope settings, compensating for the altered illumination that would affect her ability to identify and engage targets. Through her earpiece, Elena could hear Captain Rodriguez coordinating Delta Squad's assault on the mining facility. His voice carried a confidence that had been absent earlier in the engagement, reflecting the tactical advantage that Elena's precision fire had created. Alpha Team, breach the main building. Bravo Team, clear the eastern perimeter. Charlie Team, provide overwatch. We have momentum, let's finish this. Elena smiled grimly behind her scope.
Momentum was exactly what they had, and she intended to maintain it until every threat had been eliminated and Delta Squad was safely extracted from the valley. Her rifle was ready. Her position was secure, and there were still insurgents in the facility below who had not yet learned to fear the phantom shots that came from above. The real work was just beginning. Elena's spotter scope revealed movement in the facility's northwestern sector, where a cluster of corrugated storage buildings created natural choke points between the main processing area and the perimeter fence. 3 insurgents were repositioning, carrying what appeared to be a mortar tube and base plate. The weapon would give them the ability to drop indirect fire onto Delta Squad's positions, negating the cover that had protected the Americans thus far. The mortar team was moving tactically, using buildings and equipment to mask their movement from ground-level observation. They had learned from the fate of their colleagues and were maintaining discipline, avoiding the open areas where Elena's previous targets had been exposed. But their movement pattern was predictable, following the natural terrain features that channeled their advance toward a position that would provide optimal firing angles. Elena tracked them through her scope, noting their speed and direction. The lead insurgent carried the tube assembly, while the second man handled the base plate and the third managed a canvas bag that likely contained ammunition. They were approximately 1,950 meters from her position, moving through an area where scattered mining equipment provided intermittent concealment. The challenge was not just the range or the moving targets, but the timing required to neutralize the mortar team before they could establish their firing position. Once they set up the weapon, they would be able to engage Delta Squad from behind cover, potentially stopping the American advance and restoring the insurgents' tactical advantage. Elena calculated the intercept point where the mortar team would emerge from their current concealment and cross an open area near the facility's vehicle maintenance yard. The crossing would take approximately 15 seconds, during which she would have multiple opportunities to engage. But she would need to account for the team's reaction to her first shot, knowing that the survivors would immediately seek cover and alter their movement pattern. The wind had shifted again, now coming from the west-northwest at 12 miles per hour with gusts reaching 18. Elena adjusted her scope's windage accordingly, making the minute corrections that would ensure accuracy at this range. The atmospheric pressure had dropped slightly as the weather front approached, another variable that would affect the bullet's trajectory over the extended flight path. Through her spotter scope, Elena watched the mortar team approach the open area. They paused at the edge of their concealment, with the lead insurgent scanning the area before signaling the others to follow. It was good tactical procedure, but it also gave Elena additional time to prepare her shot. She selected the lead insurgent as her primary target, reasoning that eliminating the man carrying the mortar tube would most effectively disrupt the team's mission. The tube assembly was the most critical component of the weapon system, and replacing it would require the team to either abort their mission or return to their supply cache for another weapon. Elena's crosshairs settled on the insurgent's center mass as he prepared to cross the open ground. Her breathing cycle reached its controlled pause, and her finger took up the slack in the Barrett's trigger. The familiar weight of the weapon against her shoulder provided reassurance, a constant that remained unchanged despite the variables of wind, range, and target movement. The insurgent stepped into the open area, moving at a steady pace toward the position where the mortar team intended to set up their weapon. Elena led the target slightly, accounting for his movement speed and the bullet's flight time. Her crosshairs tracked smoothly across the scope's field of view, maintaining perfect alignment despite the target's motion. The trigger broke cleanly, and the Barrett's fifth shot departed with the same thunderous report that had characterized the previous engagements. Elena maintained her sight picture, tracking the target through her scope to observe the shot's effect. The .50 caliber bullet struck the lead insurgent as he reached the midpoint of the open area, the massive projectile's impact dropping him instantly. The mortar tube assembly scattered across the ground, its components separating as the insurgent fell. The remaining two members of the mortar team reacted immediately, diving for cover behind a disabled mining truck. Elena was already tracking their movement, anticipating their reaction and preparing her follow-up shot. The second insurgent, carrying the base plate, attempted to reach the scattered components of the mortar tube. Elena's sixth shot caught him as he emerged from behind the truck, eliminating the second element of the mortar team before he could recover the weapon components. The third insurgent remained behind cover, apparently unwilling to expose himself to retrieve the mortar system. Through her earpiece, Elena heard Captain Rodriguez reporting their progress to the operations center. "Base, this is Delta Leader. We've advanced to within 50 meters of the primary objective. Opposition has been significantly reduced by precision fire from unknown friendly." Continuing assault, Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction at the acknowledgement, but her attention immediately returned to the tactical situation below. Delta Squad's advance had reached the facility's outer perimeter, but the most dangerous phase of the engagement was just beginning. Close-quarters combat in an urban environment favored the defender, who knew the terrain and had prepared defensive positions. Her spotter scope revealed insurgents moving within the buildings, repositioning to face the Americans. Elena counted at least 8 fighters still active, armed with automatic weapons and positioned behind substantial cover. They had learned to avoid exposure to long-range fire, keeping to the interior spaces where Elena's rifle could not reach them. But buildings had windows, and windows created opportunities. Elena shifted her focus to the main processing building, where muzzle flashes indicated the presence of at least 3 insurgents firing from different floors. The building's windows were large, designed to provide natural lighting for industrial operations, but they also created vulnerabilities that a precision marksman could exploit. A figure appeared briefly in a second-floor window, firing a burst from an assault rifle before ducking back into the interior. Elena tracked the window, noting the timing of the insurgent's exposure and the pattern of his movement. He was firing approximately every 30 seconds, exposing himself for 3 to 4 seconds at a time. The range to the window was 1,876 meters, well within the Barrett's effective envelope. The angle was moderate, approximately 25 degrees downward, which simplified the ballistic calculations. The wind remained steady from the west-northwest, requiring a consistent correction that Elena had already dialed into her scope. Elena synchronized her breathing with the insurgent's movement pattern, preparing to fire. During his next exposure, the target would be visible for only a few seconds, requiring precise timing and immediate trigger control. There would be no opportunity for last-second adjustments or hesitation. The insurgent appeared in the window exactly on schedule, his assault rifle visible as he searched for targets among Delta Squad's advancing elements. Elena's crosshairs were centered on the window opening, and her trigger finger completed its pressure as the target became fully visible. The Barrett's 7th shot shattered the window and eliminated the insurgents simultaneously, the .50 caliber bullet continuing through the building's interior with devastating effect. The muzzle flashes from that window ceased immediately, and Elena was already scanning for the next threat. 2 floors below, another insurgent was firing from a ground-level window, his position protected by sandbags that had been arranged to create a firing port while providing cover from ground-level assault. The position was well designed for conventional infantry combat, but it offered no protection against fire from Elena's elevated position. The insurgent's head and shoulders were visible above the sandbag barrel. As he aimed his weapon toward Delta Squad's positions, Elena placed her crosshairs on the target's upper torso, accounting for the angle that would carry the bullet downward through his body armor's weakest points. Her 8th shot eliminated the ground floor position, and the sustained fire from the main building decreased noticeably. Elena could see Delta Squad's Alpha team approaching the building's main entrance, using tactical movement techniques that minimized their exposure to the remaining defender.
Staff Sergeant Chen had managed to stabilize Corporal Williams and was now participating in the assault, his medical bag secured to his gear while he carried his rifle in the standard infantry configuration. The team's men had transformed back into an infantry soldier, a testament to the cross-training that made special operations units so effective. Elena's radio crackled with another transmission from the operations center. All units be advised that weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Extraction window may be limited. Expedite mission completion. The message carried implications that Elena understood immediately. The approaching weather front would not only delay the extraction helicopters but might also affect her ability to provide continued fire support. Wind gusts above 20 miles per hour would push even the .50 caliber bullet off target at these ranges, and precipitation would reduce visibility through her scope. She needed to accelerate her engagement timeline, eliminating the remaining threats before atmospheric conditions degraded beyond acceptable limits. Elena's spotter scope revealed a new threat developing in the facility's eastern sector. A group of insurgents had gathered behind a concrete utility building, apparently preparing for a flanking maneuver that would take them around Delta Squad's advancing elements. If successful, the flanking attack would catch the Americans in a crossfire and potentially reverse the tactical momentum that Elena's precision fire had created. The insurgents were maintaining excellent cover discipline, exposing themselves only minimally as they coordinated their movement. Elena could see portions of their equipment and occasionally a shoulder or elbow as they maneuvered behind the building, but no clear shots presented themselves. The concrete utility building was approximately 40 meters long and 20 meters wide, with the insurgents positioned along its western wall. Elena calculated that they would need to emerge from cover at the building's northern or southern corner to execute their flanking maneuver, creating brief opportunities for engagement. She positioned her crosshairs at the southern corner where the building's wall met an open area that the insurgents would need to cross. The range was 2,087 meters, requiring careful calculation of wind drift and bullet drop. Elena made the necessary scope adjustments and settled into position to wait for the insurgents to reveal themselves. The first insurgent appeared at the corner exactly where Elena had predicted, pausing to scan the area before signaling the others to follow. Elena's ninth shot caught him as he stepped into the open, the .50 caliber bullet's impact dropping him immediately and alerting the remaining insurgents to the continued threat from above. The flanking maneuver collapsed as the surviving insurgents retreated back behind the utility building, their tactical coordination disrupted by the sudden loss of their point man. Elena had successfully prevented the flanking attack, but she knew that the insurgents would attempt another approach. Through her spotter scope, Elena observed Delta Squad's continued advance into the facility. Alpha Team had reached the main building and was preparing to breach the entrance, while Bravo Team provided cover fire and Charlie Team secured the eastern approaches. The Americans were executing a textbook assault, using their training and superior coordination to overcome the numerical disadvantage, but the facility's interior spaces would neutralize Elena's ability to provide fire support.
Once Delta Squad entered the buildings, the engagement would become a close-quarters battle where marksmanship would be less important than reflexes and room-clearing techniques. Elena needed to eliminate as many threats as possible before the Americans moved inside. Her scope revealed movement in the facility's administrative building, a two-story structure that overlooked the main approach routes. Windows on both floors showed signs of defensive preparation, with furniture and equipment arranged to provide firing positions. Elena counted at least 4 insurgents moving between positions inside the building, coordinating fields of fire that would cover Delta Squad's advance. The administrative building presented multiple targets, but Elena would need to engage them in sequence to prevent the survivors from adapting to her fire. She selected the second-floor positions first, reasoning that elevation would give those insurgents the best observation of Delta Squad's movements. A figure appeared in a corner window, visible from the waist up as he aimed a rifle toward the approaching Americans. Is Siebel Piri, for Ford Nerkins. Bertford Ner.
Yarai.
Bertford Netzid Siebel Prisiebel toward Ner Pris.
Yarai. Yarai.
Bertford Neri Sitchen have been a Beal toward him Tumul toward.
Choose. Berfare. 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 Iaurai. Berfare.
Elena's crosshairs found the target immediately, and her 10th shot eliminated the threat before he could fire. The window's glass exploded inward, and the insurgent disappeared from view. Elena immediately shifted to a first-floor window where another insurgent was visible. The target was partially concealed behind an overturned desk, but his head and shoulders were exposed as he searched for targets. Elena's 11th
Iaurai. Iaurai. Shot struck him. Center mass.
the .50 caliber bullet penetrating the improvised cover and eliminating the threat. The administrative building's defensive fire decreased dramatically, but Elena could see insurgents still moving in the interior spaces. They had learned to avoid the windows, staying deep inside the building where they remained invisible to her scope. Elena's ammunition count was becoming a consideration. She had fired 11 shots from her 20-round magazine, leaving 9 rounds immediately available. Her spare magazines were positioned within easy reach, but reloading would require several seconds during which she could not provide fire support. She decided to conserve her remaining rounds for the most critical targets, those that posed the greatest threat to Delta Squad's assault or their eventual extraction. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through her earpiece, providing a tactical update that confirmed Elena's assessment. "Base, this is Delta Leader. We've eliminated multiple hostile positions and are beginning building clearance. Request extraction birds be positioned for immediate pickup once area is secure." Elena scanned the facility through her spotter scope, searching for any remaining external threats that might interfere with Delta Squad's building clearance operations. The insurgents had been reduced to small groups operating from prepared positions inside the structures, but they still possessed the capability to inflict casualties on the advancing movement in the facility's workshop building caught Elena's attention. The structure was located near the main processing plant, connected by an elevated walkway that would allow insurgents to move between buildings without exposing themselves to ground-level fire. Elena could see figures moving across the walkway, relocating to positions that would allow them to engage Delta Squad from unexpected angles. The walkway was approximately 3 meters wide and 15 meters long, elevated 8 meters above the ground. Insurgents crossing the walkway would be exposed to Elena's fire for the duration of their transit, creating opportunities for engagement that would not exist once they reached their destination. Elena positioned her crosshairs at the walkway's midpoint, calculating the lead required for targets moving at a walking pace. The range was 1,923 meters, nearly identical to her first shot of the engagement. The familiar distance provided confidence in her scope settings and ballistic calculations. The first insurgent appeared on the walkway, moving quickly but not running. Elena led the target appropriately and fired.
Berfare. 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 Blumely. Berfadmos. Berfare. 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 Blake Elapsta twos. Bushes. 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 Bushes.
50 caliber bullet struck the insurgent's center mass. The impact knocked him sideways, and he fell from the walkway to the ground below. A second
insurgent had been following closely behind, and Elena's 13th shot caught him before he could retreat to cover.
The walkway was clear, and the insurgent's attempt to reposition had been thwarted. Elena's radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the operations center.
All units.
Weather front arriving ahead of schedule, winds increasing to 25 miles per hour with gusts to 40, precipitation beginning in 30 minutes. Extraction window is now critical. The weather update changed the tactical timeline significantly. Winds above 20 miles per hour would make Elena's long-range shots increasingly difficult, and precipitation would reduce visibility through her scope to unacceptable levels. Delta Squad would need to complete their mission and reach the extraction point before conditions deteriorated further. Elena scanned the facility one final time, searching for any remaining threats that could interfere with the mission's completion. The insurgents' organized resistance had been broken by her precision fire, but individual fighters might still pose threats to Delta Squad during the building clearance phase. Her spotter scope revealed a final threat, an insurgent with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher positioning himself in the ruins of the facility's power plant. The position would allow him to engage the extraction helicopters when they arrived, potentially shooting down the aircraft and trapping Delta Squad in the facility. The insurgent was approximately 2,156 meters from Elena's position, partially concealed behind concrete rubble but visible enough to present a target. The range was
the limit of her effective engagement envelope, especially with winds beginning to increase, but the threat to the extraction aircraft made the shot essential.
Elena made final adjustments to her scope, accounting for the increasing wind and the challenging angle to the target. Her breathing cycle reached its controlled pause, and her finger applied steady pressure to the trigger. The Barrett's 14th shot departed with authority, beginning its long journey across the valley toward the insurgent with the RPG launcher. Elena tracked the target through her scope, watching as the 50 caliber bullet found its mark and eliminated the final external threat to Delta Squad's mission. The facility fell silent except for the distant sounds of Delta Squad conducting their building clearance operations. Elena had systematically eliminated 14 targets, breaking the insurgents' organized resistance and providing the tactical advantage that allowed the Americans to assault the facility successfully. Through her earpiece, Elena heard Captain Rodriguez coordinating the final phase of the operation. Charlie Team, secure the landing zone. Bravo Team, complete building clearance. Alpha Team, prepare packages for extraction. We're going home. Elena began preparing for her own extraction, carefully packing her equipment and preparing to abandon her position. The weather front was approaching rapidly, and she would need to reach the primary extraction point before conditions became impossible for helicopter operations. But as she secured her rifle and gathered her gear, Elena felt the quiet satisfaction that came from a mission accomplished. 14 shots had made the difference between success and disaster, between Delta Squad's safe return and their potential loss in an abandoned mining facility. The phantom shots from above had done their work, and the elite unit was no longer trapped. Elena's earpiece erupted with the sharp crack of automatic weapons fire and the shouted commands of close-quarters battle. Delta Squad had penetrated the main processing building, but the insurgents waiting inside had turned the industrial complex into a deadly maze of ambush points and kill zones. Every corridor echoed with gunfire, and every room could hide an enemy fighter willing to die rather than surrender. Contact front. 2 tangos in the control room. Staff Sergeant Chen's voice cut through the radio static, followed immediately by the distinctive sound of his M4 carbine firing in controlled bursts. The building's thick concrete walls muffled the sounds of combat, but Elena could track the engagement's progression through the radio chatter and occasional muzzle flashes visible through windows. The weather front arrived with sudden violence, transforming the mountain environment from challenging to nearly impossible. Wind gusts reached 35 miles per hour, strong enough to move Elena's rifle barrel despite her firm grip, and the first fat snowflakes began drifting down from the darkening sky. Her scope's clarity remained perfect, but she knew that within minutes the precipitation would create visual obstructions that would end her ability to provide effective fire support. Through her spotter scope, Elena watched as insurgents who had remained hidden during her systematic elimination of external threats began emerging from concealed positions throughout the facility. They moved in small groups, using the cover of the storm and the distraction of the indoor firefight to reposition themselves around Delta Squad's entry points. These were not the same fighters she had been engaging for the past hour. These were the reserves, the final defensive line that had been held back for exactly this moment. Elena counted at least 6 insurgents moving through the facility's northern maintenance area, where a series of underground tunnels connected the various buildings. They carried demolition charges and automatic weapons, moving with the purposeful determination of fighters executing a predetermined plan. Their objective was clear: seal Delta Squad inside the processing building and eliminate them with explosives. The range to the maintenance area was 2,234 meters, and the increasing wind made accurate fire extremely challenging.
Elena's scope showed wind flags whipping violently, indicating gusts that would push even her .50 caliber bullets significantly off target. She would need to time her shots to coincide with momentary lulls in the wind, a technique that required perfect coordination between observation and execution. The first group of insurgents reached the building's northern entrance, where they began placing explosive charges against the doorframe. Elena could see the distinctive shape of plastic explosives being molded into position, along with the electronic detonators that would trigger a controlled demolition. If those charges detonated, they would not only seal the entrance but potentially collapse sections of the building's structure. Elena adjusted her scope for the extreme range and waited for a break in the wind. The insurgent placing the charges worked methodically. Unaware that he was being observed from nearly 2.5 kilometers away, his concentration on the demolition work made him an ideal target, standing relatively still while his attention focused on the technical aspects of his task. A momentary lull in the wind provided Elena with the opportunity she needed. Her 15th shot crossed the valley in the teeth of the storm, fighting through wind gusts that tried to push it off course. The .50 caliber bullet struck the insurgent as he connected the final and the explosive charges scattered across the ground without detonating. The remaining insurgents in the group reacted to the loss of their demolitions expert by taking cover behind concrete barriers near the entrance, but their mission had been compromised, and Elena could see them arguing among themselves about whether to continue with improvised explosive placement or retreat to alternate positions. Inside the processing building, Delta Squad's assault had reached the facility's central control room, where the high-value target was believed to be located. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through Elena's earpiece with controlled urgency. "Base, this is Delta Leader.
Target building is heavily fortified, multiple defensive positions on every floor. We need more time to clear systematically." Elena understood the tactical situation immediately. Delta Squad was trapped in a vertical battle, fighting floor by floor through a building that had been prepared for exactly this type of assault. The insurgents inside had the advantage of prepared positions, superior knowledge of the terrain, and defensive weapons that could stop the American advance at any choke point. But the insurgents outside were preparing to ensure that Delta Squad never had the opportunity to complete their clearance of the building. Elena's spotter scope revealed a second group of insurgents moving through the facility's southern workshop area. These fighters carried different equipment, shoulder-fired missiles that could destroy the extraction helicopters when they arrived. Elena recognized the distinctive profile of surface-to-air missiles, weapons that could engage aircraft at ranges of several kilometers in altitude that would make evasive maneuvering impossible. The missile team was positioning themselves in the workshop's upper level, where large windows would provide clear fields of fire toward the extraction landing zone. Once in position, they would be able to engage the helicopters during the most vulnerable phase of the extraction, when the aircraft would be hovering low and slow while Delta Squad boarded. Elena's ammunition situation was becoming critical. She had 5 rounds remaining in her current magazine, with 2 spare magazines providing an additional 40 rounds. But each shot was becoming more difficult as the weather conditions continued to deteriorate, and she could not afford to waste ammunition on shots that had low probability of success. The missile team reached their firing position and began setting up their weapons. Elena could see them through the workshop windows, assembling the launchers and preparing for engagement. The range was 1,967 meters, challenging but manageable if she could time her shots during the brief lulls in the wind. Elena's 16th shot shattered the workshop window and eliminated the lead missile operator before he could complete the weapons assembly. The shoulder-fired missile clattered to the floor, its guidance system damaged by fragments from the explosive window glass. The second operator grabbed for the weapon, but Elena's 17th shot dropped him before he could bring the missile online. The workshop fell silent, and the immediate threat to the extraction helicopters was neutralized. But Elena knew that more threats were developing throughout the facility, and her ability to engage them was being reduced with each passing minute as the storm intensified. Snowfall was increasing rapidly, creating a white veil that reduced visibility through Elena's scope to less than 2,000 meters. Wind gusts now exceeded 40 miles per hour, making accurate fire at extended ranges nearly impossible. Elena realized that her window for providing effective overwatch was closing rapidly. Inside the processing building, Delta Squad had reached the 4th floor, where sustained gunfire indicated heavy resistance. Elena could hear the distinctive sound of grenades detonating, followed by the rapid fire of multiple automatic weapons.
The insurgents were making their final stand in the building's upper levels, using every available position to slow the American advance. Elena's radio crackled with an emergency transmission from Captain Rodriguez. Overwatch 7, this is Delta Leader. We have wounded and are encountering heavy resistance on floor 4. Unknown number of hostiles remaining. Can you provide fire support through the building's eastern windows? Elena immediately shifted her scope to the processing building's eastern face, where large industrial windows provided views into the upper floors. The range was much shorter than her previous engagements, only 1,645 meters, but the wind was still a significant factor. She could see muzzle flashes inside the building as the firefight continued, but identifying specific targets through the windows was extremely challenging. A figure appeared briefly in a fourth-floor window, firing an automatic weapon toward Delta Squad's positions inside the building. Elena tracked the window and waited for the insurgent to reappear. When he did, her 18th shot eliminated him instantly, the .50 caliber bullet continuing through the building's interior with devastating effect. The gunfire from that window ceased, but Elena could see additional insurgents moving between positions on the same floor. They were using the building's interior walls and industrial equipment to mask their movements, appearing only briefly as they maneuvered for better firing positions. Elena's 19th shot caught another insurgent. As he moved between positions, the bullet striking him through a doorway as he attempted to flank Delta Squad's advancing elements. The impact of the .50 caliber round at close range was catastrophic, and Elena could see the psychological effect on the remaining defenders as they realized that even interior positions were not safe from the precision fire coming from above. Her final shot from the current magazine eliminated a 13 insurgent who had been firing from behind an overturned table near the building's central stairway. .50 caliber bullet penetrated the improvised cover and eliminated the threat, opening a path for Delta Squad to continue their advance toward the building's upper levels. Elena ejected the empty magazine and loaded a fresh one with practiced efficiency, her movements automatic despite the deteriorating weather conditions. Snow was now falling heavily enough to accumulate on her equipment, and she had to periodically clear ice crystals from her scope's objective lens. The radio chatter from inside the building indicated that Delta Squad had gained the tactical initiative following Elena's window shots. Captain Rodriguez's voice carried renewed confidence as he coordinated the final assault on the building's remaining floors. Alpha Team, advance to floor 5. Bravo Team, clear the western corridor. Charlie Team, secure the stairway. We have them on the run. But Elena's scope revealed a new threat developing outside the building. A group of insurgents had emerged from the underground tunnel system and were positioning themselves near the facility's main gate, where they would be able to engage the extraction helicopters during approach. These fighters carried heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades, weapons that could destroy the helicopters before they reached the landing zone. The insurgents at the main gate were approximately 2,089 meters from Elena's position, well within her rifle's effective range under normal conditions. But the storm was now producing near whiteout conditions, with snow falling so heavily that Elena could barely maintain visual contact with targets beyond 1,500 meters. Elena faced a critical decision. She could attempt to engage the insurgents at the gate, knowing that the extreme weather conditions made success unlikely, or she could conserve her ammunition for closer-range threats that might develop as the extraction phase began. Either choice carried significant risks for Delta Squad's safety. The decision was made for her when her radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the operations center. All units, extraction birds are inbound. ETA 12 minutes. Weather conditions are at the absolute limit for helicopter operations. This will be the only extraction opportunity. Elena immediately shifted her focus to the main gate, knowing that the insurgents positioned there represented the greatest threat to the incoming helicopters. Even if her shots were less accurate due to the weather, she needed to disrupt their defensive positions and prevent coordinated fire against the extraction aircraft. Her 20th shot was fired through a wall of falling snow, the bullet disappearing into the white haze that had enveloped the valley. Elena lost visual contact with the target area immediately after firing, unable to confirm whether her shot had been effective. She adjusted her aim slightly and fired again, her 21st shot following the same trajectory, but offset to account for potential target movement. Through brief breaks in the snowfall, Elena caught glimpses of disruption at the main gate. One of the heavy machine gun positions appeared to have been eliminated, and she could see insurgents scrambling for new cover. Her shots had been effective despite the challenging conditions. Elena continued engaging the gate positions with calculated shots, using her experience and training to compensate for the weather conditions that would have defeated lesser marksmen. Her 22nd and 23rd shots scattered the insurgents and destroyed their coordinated defense.
leaving individual fighters seeking cover rather than maintaining organized fields of fire. Inside the processing building, Delta Squad had reached the facility's upper floors, where they located their primary objective. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through Elena's earpiece, with the satisfaction of mission accomplishment. Base, this is Delta Leader. High-value target is secure. Package acquired. Request immediate extraction. Elena felt a moment of satisfaction at the news, but her attention remained focused on the extraction phase that would be the most dangerous part of the entire operation. The insurgents knew that the Americans would need to reach the landing zone, and they would make every effort to prevent that movement, or destroy the helicopters during the pickup. The storm was now producing near-blizzard conditions, with wind gusts exceeding 45 miles per hour, and snow falling so heavily that Elena's effective engagement range had been reduced to less than 1,000 meters. She could barely see the processing building through her scope, and identifying individual targets beyond close range was becoming impossible. Elena's radio crackled with the sound of approaching helicopters, their rotors fighting against the storm winds as they navigated toward the facility. The pilots were pushing their aircraft to the absolute limits of safe operation, knowing that any delay would leave Delta Squad stranded in increasingly dangerous conditions. Through brief gaps in the snowfall, Elena could see the helicopter formation approaching from the southeast, flying low and fast to minimize their exposure to potential ground fire. The lead aircraft was a Black Hawk configured for troop transport, followed by 2 Apache gunships that would provide cover during the extraction. But as the helicopters approached the facility, Elena's scope revealed insurgents emerging from concealed positions throughout the area. They had been waiting for exactly this moment, when the aircraft would be most vulnerable during the landing and loading sequence. Elena counted at least 10 fighters positioning themselves around the landing zone, armed with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. The extraction phase had begun, and Elena was about to face the most challenging engagement of her career. The Black Hawk descended through the swirling snow like a mechanical angel, its rotors beating against wind gusts that threatened to slam it into the mountainside. Elena watched through her scope as the pilot to maintain control, the aircraft bucking and yawing and crosswinds exceeded safe operating limits. Behind the transport helicopter, the 2 Apache gunships held formation, their pilots equally challenged by the deteriorating conditions. Elena's scope revealed insurgents converging on the landing zone from multiple directions, using the storm as concealment for their final assault. They moved in coordinated groups, timing their advance to coincide with the helicopter's most vulnerable moment. The extraction that should have been Delta Squad's salvation was about to become their final battle. The first rocket-propelled grenade streaked through the snowfall toward the descending Black Hawk, its trail barely visible against the white backdrop. The pilot saw it coming, and jerked the aircraft sideways, the grenade passing close enough to the rotor disc that Elena could see the explosion's flash reflected off the spinning blades. The helicopter shuddered, but maintained its descent, the pilot demonstrating skill that bordered on miraculous.
Elena acquired the RPG team through her scope, their position revealed by the weapon's backblast signature. At 800 meters range, even the storm conditions couldn't prevent accurate fire. Her 24th shot silenced the launcher before the team could reload. The .50 caliber bullet finding its mark despite the wind and snow. Delta Squad emerged from the processing building in tactical formation, Captain Rodriguez leading his team toward the landing zone while maintaining defensive spacing. Elena could see that they carried 2 wounded soldiers, Staff Sergeant Chen supporting Corporal Williams, while the rest of the team provided security. Their movement was professional despite the urgency, each soldier covering assigned sectors as they advanced through the facility's debris-strewn courtyard. An insurgent machine gunner opened fire from the facility's water tower, his elevated position providing clear fields of fire across the landing zone. The sustained burst forced Delta Squad to take cover behind concrete barriers, pinning them down while the Black Hawk continued its dangerous descent. Elena shifted her rifle toward the tower, knowing that eliminating this threat was critical to the extraction success. The range was barely 600 meters, close enough that Elena could see the muzzle flashes clearly despite the snow. Her 25th shot struck the water tower's platform, the bullet's impact sending sparks flying as it ricocheted off steel supports. The machine gun fell silent momentarily, but Elena could see the gunner repositioning for another burst. Her 26th shot found the target, the insurgent's position becoming permanently silent as the .50 caliber bullet completed its work. The water tower threat was eliminated, but Elena could see more insurgents moving through the facility, determined to prevent Delta Squad's escape.
The Black Hawk pilot executed a combat landing that defied both gravity and common sense, dropping the aircraft onto the designated landing zone despite crosswinds that should have made the maneuver impossible. The helicopter's skids touched down hard, bouncing once before settling as the pilot fought to maintain position against the storm's fury. Delta Squad sprinted toward the aircraft, their movement covered by suppressive fire from the Apache gunships circling overhead. Elena watched through her scope as the team reached the helicopter and began loading the wounded first, following proper medical evacuation procedures even under extreme combat conditions. But insurgents were closing in from multiple directions, and Elena realized that her ammunition was running critically low. She had used 26 rounds, leaving 14 in her current magazine and 20 more in her final spare. Each shot had to count, because there would be no resupply and no second chances. A group of insurgents broke cover near the facility's eastern perimeter, charging toward the landing zone with automatic weapons and grenades. Elena tracked the leading fighter and fired her 27th shot, dropping him at 400 meters range. The following insurgents hesitated, but their momentum carried them forward into Elena's engagement zone. Her 28th and 29th shots eliminated 2 more attackers, but the remaining insurgents reached effective range and opened fire on the helicopter. Elena could see bullet strikes sparking off the Black Hawk's armored hull as the pilot maintained position despite the incoming fire. Captain Rodriguez was the last man to board the helicopter, providing rear security for his team until the final moment. As he climbed aboard, Elena could see him speaking into his radio, coordinating with the pilots for immediate departure. The Black Hawk's engines increased power, preparing for takeoff despite the continuing ground fire. Elena engaged the insurgents attacking the landing zone with methodical precision, her shots eliminating threats in order of their danger to the aircraft. Her 30th shot silenced an insurgent armed with another RPG launcher, while her 31st eliminated a machine gunner who had achieved effective range on the helicopter. The Black Hawk lifted off with Delta Squad aboard, but Elena could see that the aircraft was struggling against the storm conditions. The pilot climbed slowly, fighting crosswinds that threatened to push the helicopter into the surrounding ridgelines. The Apache gunships moved into protective formation, their crews scanning for additional threats as the formation began its dangerous transit through the mountain passes. Elena's radio crackled with Captain Rodriguez's voice, transmitted from the departing helicopter. Overwatch 7, this is Delta Leader. Package secure, extraction complete. You made the difference today. Thank you. Elena keyed her microphone briefly in acknowledgement, but her attention remained focused on the insurgents still moving through the facility below. Her job wasn't finished until the helicopters were safely clear of the engagement area, and she could see fighters positioning themselves with shoulder-fired missiles along the aircraft's departure route. The first surface-to-air missile launched from a position near the facility's main gate, its heat-seeking warhead tracking toward one of the Apache gunships. The pilot saw the launch and deployed countermeasures, chaff and flares filling the air as the aircraft maneuvered violently to break the missile's lock. The weapon detonated harmlessly in the storm, but Elena could see the launcher team preparing a second missile. Her 30-second shot eliminated the missile operator before he could complete the reload sequence, the 50 caliber bullet finding its target, despite the extreme range and weather conditions. The launcher fell silent, but Elena counted at least 3 more missile teams positioned along the departure corridor. The Apache gunships opened fire with their chain guns, laying down suppressive fire that scattered the remaining insurgents and prevented coordinated missile launches. The formation continued its climb, gaining altitude and distance from the facility as the storm intensified around them. Elena watched through her scope until the helicopters disappeared into the white haze of the blizzard, their navigation lights fading until they were invisible against the storm clouds. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge that the mission was complete, and Delta Squad was safely away from the facility. But Elena's own extraction remained uncertain. The storm had closed the mountain passes to helicopter traffic, and she would need to reach an alternate extraction point on foot. She began securing her equipment, disassembling the Barrett rifle and packing it into her carry system for the arduous journey ahead. The facility below was quiet now, the insurgents either eliminated or dispersed by the engagement's outcome. Snow continued to fall heavily, covering the evidence of the battle and gradually erasing the signs of what had transpired in this remote valley. Elena shouldered her pack and began the descent from her sniper position, moving carefully through terrain made treacherous by ice and snow. Her route would take her 12 kilometers through mountain wilderness to reach the alternate extraction point, a journey that would test her survival skills as thoroughly as the engagement had tested her marksmanship. As she moved through the storm, Elena reflected on the engagement that had just concluded. 32 shots fired, 31 targets eliminated, 1 elite unit successfully extracted from an impossible situation. The mathematics of precision marksmanship reduced to its essential elements: skill, training, and the will to succeed, when failure meant the deaths of fellow soldiers. Hours later, Elena reached the alternate extraction point where a special operations helicopter waited despite the continuing storm. The pilot helped her aboard, shouting over the rotor noise to ask if the mission had been successful. Elena nodded once and settled into her seat, securing her rifle case beside her. Through the aircraft's windows, she could see the storm beginning to clear, revealing glimpses of the mountain facility where Delta Squad had fought their desperate battle. The helicopter lifted off and turned toward home, carrying Elena away from another mission that would never appear in official records or newspaper headlines. Her work existed in the spaces between acknowledgement and anonymity, where the most important victories were measured not in recognition but in lives saved. Captain Rodriguez and Delta Squad would return to their family, their mission accomplished and their high-value target in custody. They would never know the name of the sniper who had provided overwatch from an impossible position, who had eliminated threats they never saw, who had made the difference between success and disaster. Elena preferred it that way. Her strength had always lived in the quiet moments that others never noticed, in threats neutralized before they became dangers, in precision applied when it mattered most. She had learned long ago that the most effective warriors were often the most invisible ones. In the end, what mattered was not who received credit for the victory, but that the victory had been achieved. Delta Squad was safe, the mission was complete, and somewhere in the storm-covered mountains, an abandoned facility held only empty buildings, and the rapidly fading echoes of phantom shots that had come from above when they were needed most. The helicopter disappeared into the clearing sky, carrying Elena toward her next assignment, and the next opportunity to serve in the shadows where her skills made all the difference. 3 weeks later, Elena sat in a coffee shop in Virginia Beach, watching ordinary people live their ordinary lives. The barista called out drink orders while customers checked their phones and complained about traffic. None of them knew that the woman in the corner booth had spent the previous month in classified locations, making shots that saved lives and prevented disasters they would never read about in the news. The official mission debrief had taken place in a windowless room at a facility that didn't appear on any maps. Elena had answered questions about ammunition expenditure, weather conditions, and engagement timelines, while senior officers took notes behind folders marked with classification stamps. Captain Rodriguez had been there, along with the other members of Delta Squad, their formal testimonies adding details to a report that would be filed away and forgotten by everyone except those who lived it. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from her sister asking if she was still deployed overseas. Elena typed back that she was home now, working on training schedules and equipment maintenance. It wasn't entirely untrue. The sniper community was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's capabilities, and Elena's phone had been ringing constantly with requests for instruction and consultation. She declined most of them. Teaching was important, but Elena had learned that her real value lay in operational deployment rather than classroom instruction. There were plenty of qualified instructors who could teach marksmanship fundamentals. There were far fewer snipers who could make the shots that mattered when everything was on the line. The coffee shop's television was tuned to a news channel that was discussing international security concerns and military operations in various theaters. Elena listened with half her attention while reviewing paperwork for an upcoming training exercise. The news anchors spoke about global threats and strategic challenges, but they never mentioned the small unit actions that actually prevented crises from escalating. Elena's work existed in the gap between public awareness and classified necessity. She operated in places that didn't appear on evening news broadcasts, engaging threats that were eliminated before they could become headlines. It was a lonely profession in many ways, but Elena had never needed external validation to find meaning in her service. Her phone rang with a call from Colonel Martinez, her unit commander and one of the few people who understood the full scope of Elena's capabilities. His voice carried the familiar tone of someone preparing to discuss classified matters in an insecure environment. "Are you available for a consultation next week?" Martinez asked, using the code phrase that indicated a potential operational deployment.
We have some technical challenges that could benefit from your expertise. Elena checked her calendar, noting that she had planned to visit her parents in Colorado during the same time frame. It would be the third family gathering she had missed this year due to operational requirements, but Elena understood that personal plans always came second to mission needs. I can make myself available, she replied, using the formal language that indicated her acceptance of whatever assignment was being discussed. Should I plan for an extended consultation? Possibly, Martinez said.
The technical requirements are still being evaluated. We'll have more details when you arrive for the preliminary briefing. Elena ended the call and returned her attention to the coffee shop around her. A young mother was trying to manage two small children while ordering drinks, and Elena found herself thinking about the families that Delta Squad had returned to after their mission. Captain Rodriguez had mentioned during the debrief that his daughter had a school play the following week, something he wouldn't have missed if the extraction had failed. These were the stakes that Elena understood best. Not the geopolitical implications or strategic consequences that dominated military planning sessions, but the individual lives that hung in the balance when precision and timing meant the difference between success and failure. Elena had built her career on ensuring that soldiers returned home to their families, that missions succeeded when failure wasn't an option. Her coffee had grown cold while she worked on her paperwork, and Elena realized that she had been unconsciously calculating ranges and wind corrections based on the coffee shop's layout. It was an occupational hazard of her profession, this constant mental rehearsal of tactical scenarios and shooting solutions. Even in peaceful environments, Elena's mind continued to process information through the lens of a precision marksman. Elena gathered her papers and prepared to leave the coffee shop, but she paused to watch the young mother successfully manage her children and collect her order. It was a small victory in an ordinary day, but Elena recognized the satisfaction of accomplishing a mission despite challenging circumstances. The scales were different, but the fundamental human experience of overcoming obstacles remained constant. As Elena walked to her car, she thought about the message that her story represented. Not everyone would serve in combat zones or face life and death decisions in mountain snowstorms, but everyone had opportunities to make a difference in situations that mattered to someone else. The young mother managing her children, the barista ensuring that customers received correct orders, the pilots who had extracted Delta Squad through impossible weather conditions, all were examples of competence applied when it counted most. Elena's phone buzzed with another message, this one from an unknown number. "Thank you for what you did up there. My kids got their dad back because of you. Williams family." Elena stared at the message for several moments, understanding that somehow Corporal Williams had found a way to pass along his family's gratitude despite operational security restrictions. She didn't reply to the message, but Elena saved it in her phone's memory alongside the few other communications she had received over the years from people whose lives had been affected by her work. These messages served as reminders of why precision mattered, why training was essential, why the difficult shots had to be taken even when conditions were beyond the limits of normal human capability. Elena drove home through evening traffic, passing shopping centers and suburban neighborhoods where people lived their lives without knowing that their safety and freedom were maintained by individuals willing to serve in roles that required anonymity and sacrifice. It was a responsibility that Elena had accepted years ago and one that continued to give meaning to her professional life. Her apartment was spartanly furnished but meticulously organized, with her equipment stored in precise arrangements that allowed for rapid deployment. Elena's personal life had been shaped by the demands of her profession, but she had never considered it a sacrifice. Her work provided purpose and challenge that civilian careers could not match. Elena cleaned her rifle that evening, disassembling each component and inspecting it for wear or damage. The Barrett M82A1 had performed flawlessly during the mountain engagement, but Elena maintained her equipment with the dedication of someone whose life depended on mechanical reliability. Each part was cleaned, lubricated, and checked against specifications that were measured in thousandths of an inch. As she worked, Elena reflected on the engagement's lessons and the improvements that could be made to equipment, tactics, and procedures. Every mission provided data that could enhance future operations, and Elena had filled several pages of notes with observations about cold weather effects, ammunition performance, and scope adjustments for extreme range shooting. Tomorrow would bring new training requirements, equipment evaluations, and preparation for whatever mission Colonel Martinez had in mind. Elena would continue refining her skills, pushing the boundaries of what was possible with current technology and human capability. Somewhere in the world, another elite unit would eventually find themselves trapped and outnumbered, needing phantom shots from above to tip the balance in their favor.
Elena would be ready when that moment came. Her rifle would be zeroed, her equipment prepared, and her skills honed to the edge of perfection. Because that's what quiet professionals did, they prepared for the moments when everything mattered and failure wasn't an option. The coffee shop customers would never know her name and the news anchors would never mention her contributions, but Elena understood that the most important work often happened in the spaces between recognition and anonymity, where competence and dedication made all the difference for people who counted on others to be exceptional when it mattered most. Elena closed her equipment case for the final time. After 18 years of service, 37 operational deployments, and more precision shots than any official record would ever acknowledge, she was walking away from the rifle that had defined her career. The military retirement ceremony had been small and private, attended only by those who understood the classified nature of her contributions. Colonel Martinez handed her the folded flag with words that would never appear in any public transcript. The nation owes you a debt that can never be repaid or even acknowledged. You saved lives in places that don't exist, stopped threats that never made headlines. That's the truest form of service. Elena accepted the flag without ceremony, the same quiet professionalism that had characterized every mission she had undertaken. There were no medals for the shots that prevented disasters, no ribbons for the operations that never officially happened. Her legacy existed in the soldiers who came home, the missions that succeeded, the families that remained whole because someone had been watching from above when it mattered most. 6 months later, Elena stood before a classroom of young Marines at the Scout Sniper School, sharing lessons learned through experience that couldn't be found in any manual. She taught them about wind reading, range estimation, and target identification, but more importantly, she taught them about responsibility. Every shot they would ever take in combat would carry consequences that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Precision isn't just about hitting targets, Elena told her students during their final briefing. It's about understanding that behind every decision you make, there are people counting on you to be perfect when perfection is the only acceptable standard. You'll take shots that no one will ever know about, in places that don't appear on maps, for reasons that will remain classified long after you're gone. But those shots will matter more than anything else you'll ever do. After class, Elena received a call from an unlisted number. The voice on the other end was older now, but she recognized Captain Rodriguez immediately. He was Colonel Rodriguez now, commanding his own special operations unit, continuing the cycle of leadership that made elite units effective. "I've got a situation developing," Rodriguez said without preamble. "Technical challenges that require specialized consultation. The team is good, but they need someone with your specific expertise. Interested in a short-term contract?" Elena looked out the window of her office, watching her students practice stalking techniques on the ranges below. She had found purpose in teaching, in passing along the skills and knowledge that had defined her military career. But the operational world still called to her, still offered challenges that couldn't be replicated in any training environment. "What's the timeline?" Elena asked, already knowing that she would accept whatever mission Rodriguez was proposing. Some skills were too specialized to remain unused, some expertise too valuable to waste in retirement. "Wheels up in 72 hours, Rodriguez replied, location classified until arrival, duration uncertain. The technical requirements are beyond what most consultants can provide." Elena understood the coded language immediately. Somewhere in the world, another elite unit was facing impossible odds, another situation was developing that would require precision shots at extreme range under challenging conditions. The specific details would remain classified, but the fundamental mission remained the same: ensure that the good people came home while the threats were eliminated. "I'll be ready," Elena said, ending the call and beginning her mental preparation for whatever challenge awaited. Her personal Barrett M82A1, purchased after retirement, was stored in a climate-controlled case in her apartment. Her shooting skills remained sharp through constant practice, and her tactical knowledge had only deepened through her teaching responsibilities. Elena had learned that retirement from military service didn't necessarily mean retirement from service itself. The skills that had made her exceptional in uniform remained valuable in the private sector, where governments and organizations faced threats that required specialized solutions. Her reputation in the precision marksmanship community had opened doors to opportunities that allowed her to continue making a difference on a global scale. That evening, Elena packed her gear with the same methodical precision that had characterized every deployment of her military career.
Equipment lists were checked and double-checked, ammunition was selected based on anticipated operational requirements, and her rifle was thoroughly inspected to ensure perfect mechanical function. As she worked, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a young Marine fresh out of sniper school to one of the most capable precision marksmen in the world, her career had been defined by moments when everything depended on perfect execution under impossible conditions. The mountains of Eastern Europe, where Delta Squad had been trapped, were just one chapter in a story that continued to unfold. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from one of her students, asking for clarification on a ballistics calculation they were struggling with. She replied with the correct formula and a reminder to practice the fundamentals until they became instinctive. Teaching had shown Elena that her greatest legacy wouldn't be the mission she had completed, but the marksman she had trained to carry on the profession's standards of excellence. The next morning, Elena stood at the airport's departure gate, her equipment cases properly manifested for international transport. Other passengers waited for their flights to vacation destinations and business meetings, unaware that the quiet woman reading a technical manual nearby was preparing for a mission that would determine whether unknown soldiers in an undisclosed location would survive their next engagement. Elena boarded the aircraft and settled into her seat, her mind already shifting into operational mode. Somewhere ahead lay another mountain range, another impossible shot, another opportunity to make the difference between success and disaster for people who would never know her name. The aircraft lifted off into clear morning sky, carrying Elena toward whatever challenge awaited. Through the window, she could see the training ranges where her students were practicing the skills she had taught them, preparing for their own moments when precision would matter more than anything else in the world. Elena smiled quietly and opened her mission briefing packet, ready to prove once again that when elite units found themselves trapped and outnumbered, phantom shots from above could change everything. The work continued, the mission endured, and somewhere in the world, the good people would come home because someone was watching over them with perfect aim and unwavering dedication. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.